Over 1 billion people every month go to the website Instagram to post photos of family or friends, vacation, and oftentimes their food, so that they can share with other people some of the memories they're making and some of the things that they enjoy. But over time, Instagram became less about sharing things with other people or being creative in the images you're letting other people see, and it became more about finding some kind of acknowledgement from others, reaching out to other people so that they could tell you how great and wonderful you are and how much they enjoy seeing you and the things that you're doing. And as a result of all of this, Instagram right now is testing out a feature where the likes under your photos, if you're aware of what that is, you can look at a picture and say, I really like this photo, and then you pass on and scroll and look at more. But they're working right now and are doing this in several countries, testing it out, to no longer show you or anybody else how many people actually like your photo. Now, that was met with a little bit of upsetness. It was met with a lot of anger. People want to see how much others like them. That's what this became. We want to know if people like seeing what we're putting out there, and the whole reason we're putting stuff out there anymore is just to be liked by other people. In addition to Instagram testing this new feature out, there's been some controversy, or at least people making fun of others on this platform, because many have not admitted, but been caught taking their photos and altering them drastically, to the point where the person you see in the picture and the person you see in real life look nothing alike at all. And what's the point of that? Because we want to be seen. Now, when I was loading this up not that long ago, somebody said to me, as soon as they saw the background of the picture, "Wow!" And so you may be thinking, we want to be seen, but we'd also like to see, and so I'm not going to look up at your slides this morning. These are the colors of Instagram. There's nothing I can do about it. Like a giant sunrise this morning. I didn't realize how bright it was going to be until I saw the floor completely change colors in front of me when I turned the slide on. But we want to be seen. And the people on Instagram that are doing this want to be seen so much so that they're willing to drastically alter their pictures so that strangers will give them some kind of acknowledgement, even just for a moment. This is the third of our series of social Needia. We looked at a few weeks ago, talking about Facebook, our need to belong, our need to be liked, and how we care about being a part of something that's bigger than ourselves, and how ultimately places like Facebook or our jobs, our hobbies, all the things that we look to fulfill this need to belong ultimately fail, and only Jesus can provide what we really need in the church. We looked at a couple weeks ago our need to be heard, and talking about Twitter and how everybody wants their opinion to be known and valued by those, even strangers all over the world. We want people to like what we have to say, but we talked about how in this world where anybody can speak, everybody is speaking and nobody's being heard at all. But Jesus hears every word that we bring up to Him. Today we're going to talk about, in the last of this part, next week we're going to talk about how we can take these things to the culture around us that wants to belong, to be heard, and to be seen. But today we're going to talk about this idea of how Jesus sees us. And in doing so, we're going to look at the story of Zacchaeus in Luke chapter 19. If you have your Bible, turn over there. We're going to talk about Zacchaeus and how Jesus interacted with Zacchaeus. But before we get to that, I want to talk about what they saw. The people around Zacchaeus, the culture that Zacchaeus was in, the people that he surrounded himself with, or that rather he was surrounded by, how did they view Zacchaeus as a person? And this is going to be important because the way the world saw Zacchaeus and the way Jesus saw Zacchaeus were two very different viewpoints. Here's where we're going to start. Verse 2 of Luke chapter 19. And there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. To the world around Zacchaeus, he is a chief tax collector. Here's why that's important in this culture. In this culture, the job of being a tax collector, and I say in that culture, maybe we view it the same now as well, but in that culture, if you were a tax collector, you were a traitor. You were working for the government that was oppressing the Jewish people. Rome had no business being in Israel as far as the Jews were concerned. And so a tax collector working for the government that was over them is somebody who is a traitor. On top of all of that, you consider the question that Jesus was asked, should we pay taxes to Caesar? To which Jesus gives the answer, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's. But the question there has to do with the Jews don't want to pay taxes to the Roman government because they don't think that they should. And so the tax collector is a traitor on two sides. He is serving the government that's oppressing God's people, for one thing. For two, he's taking God's money and giving it to this group that's then going to use it to keep them oppressed. He's a traitor on two accounts. But not just that. He's not just a tax collector. It says that he was a chief tax collector. He's good at his job. He's higher up. He's not just a new recruit. He's not somebody at the bottom rung of tax collectors. He's somebody who's very good at collecting his taxes. And it's very likely that everybody here knew exactly who Zacchaeus was, and nobody wanted anything to do with him. Historically speaking, we read in a few places that when the Jewish people saw a tax collector walking down the road, they would go out of their way, even if it was inconvenient for them, to walk on the other side of the road where the tax collector was not, so that they didn't have to set foot where the tax collector had walked. That's how much disgust the people had for tax collectors. And here is Zacchaeus, the chief of those tax collectors. Number two, still in verse 2, it says that he is rich. The reason we bring this up is because, one, as we mentioned a moment ago, he's good at his job. Chief tax collector, he knows what he's doing. He's really good at taking money from other people. But along with this, you have this idea of tax collectors are thieves. One, as we mentioned a moment ago, they're taking God's money and giving it to a government that's using that money to oppress the Jews even further. So you're a thief in that regard. But number two, there were a lot of tax collectors that would take a little extra money, keep it for themselves, and line their own pockets. It's funny, in verse 8, and I want you to notice this, we'll talk about this a little later, but when Jesus and Zacchaeus have their interaction, Zacchaeus says this, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything. Zacchaeus doesn't believe he's taken more than he should. And based on Jesus' response to Zacchaeus, it doesn't appear that Zacchaeus is somebody who actually stole more money than he was supposed to, or took more money than he was supposed to. But he would have been seen as somebody who was a thief. His riches were not earned in any decent way as far as the people around him were concerned. You shouldn't be working for them, and you're probably taking extra from us. So not only is Zacchaeus seen as a traitor, he's seen as a thief, and number three, he's short. We're going a little bit of a different direction now, but the text talks about his stature here in verse 3. Look at this. And he was seeking to see Jesus, who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd he could not, because he was small of stature. He's probably getting made fun of for his appearance. Here's one thing we know for sure. He's in a crowd of people. He wants to see Jesus. He wants to encounter Jesus. He's heard the stories. He's heard some of the teachings as Jesus has traveled, and he knows that Jesus is coming through town. I want to see Jesus. The crowd won't move out of his way. Some of you might be thinking about a concert you've been to or a movie theater you've been to where somebody tall stands up, in the row right in front of you. What do we say when that happens? Down in front. Could you step one over to the side, please? I can't see. Maybe Zacchaeus is here in the crowd saying, would you mind? Would you mind if maybe you opened up for me a little bit? I can't see what's going on. I'd really like to see. But nobody moves. On account of the crowd, he has to leave. Maybe Zacchaeus isn't saying anything at all, but the crowd's noticing Zacchaeus here. But because they know who he is, a traitor and a thief, they don't care anything about him. They're not going to move for Zacchaeus. And no doubt, because of his stature, I'm sure they talked about when they saw Zacchaeus coming just how small he was. And so here in verse 3 and into verse 4, we see him climb up into a tree just so that he can have some kind of height in order to see Jesus. There's one more perception that the people have of Zacchaeus, and it's this, found in verse 7. Zacchaeus is a sinner. When Jesus goes and calls Zacchaeus down, they go to his house, they're going to go eat together, and the people, it says, when they saw it, they all grumbled. He has gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. 8 times throughout Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the phrase tax collectors and sinners is used. 3 times Luke uses it. And over again throughout parables and other examples, tax collectors are set up on a pedestal in a good way ultimately, but at the beginning, you have the gospel writers playing on the cultural view of the tax collector, that they were worse sinners than anybody else. Now, part of that has to do with their being traitors. Part of that has to do with their view of being thieves. That's how they were regarded. You jump back a chapter into Luke 18. There's a text that says 2 men went up into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee, the other a tax collector. And Jesus, as he's telling this parable, it's like he's saying, okay, we're going to deal with the Pharisees on one end. I need to correct some of their mistakes. And on the other end, what's the best example I can think to the opposite? Somebody that nobody in the culture likes, that everybody would say, that's not a spiritual person, tax collector. 2 men went up into the temple to pray, a Pharisee and a tax collector. And that phrase, tax collectors and sinners, and their reaction here in verse 7, he's gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. That's how everybody saw tax collectors. And it's not that they were wrong. Did the tax collectors have sin? Yes. But that's not where it ended for them. Tax collectors and these other sinners were seen as people who were irredeemable. You can't move past the sin you have in your life. That's where you're locked in. You are a sinful person, and that's it for you. There's no hope. So when people see Zacchaeus, they see a man who they consider a traitor to God. They see somebody who they believe is a thief that steals from God's people, that steals God's money for his own advantage. And they see somebody who can't be redeemed out of his sinfulness. That this is just who he is. There's no hope for him. That's what they saw when they looked at Zacchaeus. I want us to look now at what Jesus saw when he looked at Zacchaeus. Only 3 here. The first one is this, found in verse 4. When Zacchaeus can't see in the crowd, he goes and runs up ahead, climbs up into the tree. Here's what Jesus says, verse 4. So he ran ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. Zacchaeus' whole point, all he wanted to do that day was to see this Jesus who everybody was talking about. He wanted to experience for himself the teachings, the miracles that Jesus had done for so many other people. And Jesus will see him in that tree as somebody who wants nothing more than just to encounter the Son of God. That's how Jesus sees Zacchaeus in the first place. He's a seeker. He's looking for something. He's looking for something greater than himself. Nobody else around Zacchaeus noticed that. It wouldn't surprise me if people saw Zacchaeus climbing up the tree and went, oh, look at him. He's being prideful. He's trying to get to know this Jesus because he wants to talk to Jesus about how great he is. Maybe he wants to ask about Can you tell these people that tax collecting is perfectly fine and that I'm not as bad as everyone says that I am? It wouldn't surprise me if the people around Zacchaeus were thinking all of these negative things based on what they could see, but Jesus could see more. And he realized when he saw Zacchaeus, this is a guy who's looking for something. This is a guy who's seeking after me. Here's the next one, verses 5 through 6. Jesus recognized Zacchaeus as somebody who had a heart that was willing to change. In verse 5 we read this, "And when Jesus came to that place, he looked up and said to him, 'Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today.' So he hurried and came down and received him joyfully." Zacchaeus is seen in the tree. His plan worked. He couldn't see in the crowd. I'm going to get to the top of this tree so that Jesus will see me, or at least so that I could see him. And Jesus turns to him in the tree and says, "Hurry and come down. I'm going to your house." And I like how repetitious the following verse is. He says to Zacchaeus, "Hurry and come down." And it says Zacchaeus hurried and came down. He didn't waste any time. This is what Jesus wants me to do. This is the person I wanted to encounter. Here I am. I'm hurrying and coming down. But then it adds this in verse 7. He received him joyfully. There might be a lot of reasons for the joy. I think part of it has to do with somebody finally saw Zacchaeus for who he really was. He's not just some traitor. He's not just some thief. He's a guy trying to do his best to live for God. And here comes Jesus, and he sees exactly that. "Come down. Hurry. I need to go to your house today." Somebody finally saw Zacchaeus for who he really was. Here's the third. When Jesus looked at Zacchaeus, he saw somebody who was a sinner, just like everybody around Zacchaeus had seen from the beginning. Somebody who was lost. Look at this in verses 9 and 10. They have this discussion. It's a very quick discussion. At least the part we have recorded here is very quick. And Zacchaeus responds to the Lord, "The half of my goods I give to the poor. If I've defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold." And here's what Jesus says in verse 9. "Today salvation's come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham. The Son of Man came to seek and save the lost." Jesus comes in and he meets Zacchaeus, and you know what he sees? He sees a sinner just like everybody else, but not in the same way. In verse 7, when Zacchaeus is taking Jesus to his home, the people grumble and say he's going to be the guest of a sinner. And here in the house, Jesus says, we have a sinner right here. I'm talking to a sinner, but it's not in the same way. The people didn't think Zacchaeus could be redeemed, to come out of his sin. It could not happen for him. Jesus didn't see that. He saw somebody lost who could be found. He saw somebody who was gone but could be saved. To Jesus, there wasn't ever a person who was too far gone. You could come back, regardless of what everybody else saw in you. You could be saved. There's some bad news and good news in all this, and at the end of the day, it's good news. Jesus still sees the same way. So does the world. Did you notice when we looked at the world, everything was on the outside? When they saw his appearance, that's the outside. What they saw as his occupation, he's a chief tax collector, that's on the outside. His riches, his wealth, that's on the outside. And his sinfulness, their response to him being a sinner has to do with what they see on the outside. He is a tax collector. He has to be a sinful individual. That's that phrase, tax collectors and sinners. That's who they are. We can watch what they're doing, and because of what they're doing, they are sinful people. The world still looks at people from the outside because that's all they can see. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people who are working very hard to pretend to be something they're not, to pretend to be somewhere they're not, so the people who don't care about them at all can press a heart button under one of their pictures. I don't know if you've paid a lot of attention to people who have been accused of any kind of wrongdoing, be it politicians, athletes, chefs, movie directors, even people who just have the unfortunate mistake of being caught up into something and they get swept up and they're destroyed. Every single time that somebody gets called out for some kind of wrongdoing in their past or in the current moment, do you know what's never there? There is never any forgiveness. There's no chance for it. And in the last several years, I can't recall a time where a public apology was given. And I mean a genuine public apology where the people online said, you know what, I think he or she is being genuine, we should forgive them. It's no, you never should have done it in the first place. I hope you never do a movie again. I hope no team ever signs you. And we move on, throw them away, and go to the next person to destroy. We're looking on the outside and destroying people for it and not allowing any chance for anything to change. We're growing up in a time where what we see is what we perceive as reality, but a lot of it is fake. And so it makes a lot of sense that when somebody gives even a genuine apology, we don't see it as such. It's fake, because everything's fake. Did you notice Jesus' view of Zacchaeus? That every single thing was inward. Jesus saw everything inside of Zacchaeus, and he's the only one that can do that. And everything he saw, Zacchaeus' desire to seek after him, it's on the inside. You can't tell that when you look at the tax collector, who everyone calls the thief and the traitor. You can't see somebody who's seeking after God, but Jesus saw it because he knew his heart. Jesus, when he says that you've got a heart that's willing to change, when he goes in and takes goes to Zacchaeus' house with him, he sees somebody who's willing to change his life. People in the world can't see that because what they see on the outside is, well, you're still a tax collector and you're still rich and you still don't care about what you're doing. They don't see the heart change. And people, when they looked at Zacchaeus, all they could see was his sinfulness and that there was no way out of it whatsoever. But Jesus saw somebody who could come back. I think sometimes we view ourselves in the same way that the people viewed Zacchaeus. We have fallen into the trap. Our eyes, where the world is set for us. We look at sight through their eyes. We're following their standard. And maybe we don't do it with other people, but we do it with ourselves. I wonder how many quote-unquote tax collectors we ignore because we look at them and go, they would never want to hear the gospel. They enjoy these activities too much. They enjoy watching these things too much. They enjoy hanging around these people too much. They would never want to change what they have. And so I'm just not going to share it with them. That's how Zacchaeus was viewed by the people. And I wonder how many times we view other people in that same way, but I also wonder how many times we view ourselves in the same way. God, I'm just a horrible, sinful person. I don't know what you would want to do with me. They sang a song just a little bit ago, Remind Me, Dear Lord, the second verse. I don't understand how he could love me enough to go to Calvary. I don't get it. But he does. And I wonder how many times, instead of thinking about what Jesus has done, we look at all the reasons why, well, I don't deserve it, and he shouldn't have done it for me, and I'm just a sinful person, and I'm just like the tax collector, and I'm just like this person who's trying to get things right and failing, and everybody else knows it, and everybody else sees me for all my failures, and I'm not deserving of anything. You are right on one part of that. If we're saying that about ourselves, we are right about one part of that. We don't deserve any of this. But Jesus sees us and gives it anyway. Verse 10 is the verse for us too. For the Son of Man came to seek and save what was lost. Why does Jesus, throughout the Gospels, heal and teach and work miracles for people? Because he came to seek and save those that are lost. Why does Jesus spend all this time going through lesson after lesson with all these groups of people, most of which are just there so that they can eat something afterward? Because he's coming to seek and save the lost. Why does he go and die on a cross? Why does he leave heaven to come here to seek and save the lost? Two parts as we conclude this morning. If you're somebody here who's not a Christian, and the reason that you're not a Christian is because you've been thinking about all the things that you've done wrong, God couldn't possibly forgive me for what I've done. Jesus sees what you've done. He knows. It's not a secret to him. But you need to understand that what you've done in your life is not more powerful than what Jesus can do in your life. And it's not more powerful than what Jesus has done in your life. His death on the cross was not only kind of powerful. It didn't take away some of the sins. It took them all away. He knows and he sees what you've done. And so if that's holding you back, let us show you how Jesus undid all of that. For the Christians, it's quite possible that we're sitting right now, that you are dealing with I was at camp this week, and at one of the nights at camp, every night we have the campers get up, they speak, they say a little bit, and they go sit down. We're trying to teach them to speak publicly in front of other people, to watch filler words, to watch their hand gestures and things like that. After one of those nights, the campers said, all the campers stay, and the counselors went, and we did our own thing. It was guys who had been to previous camps and to other camps as well. And they said, well, let's all get together and talk. And what happened was, over the course of, I think, an hour or an hour and a half, we thought it was going to be some quick, they said devotional. And so next time I preach for an hour, hour and a half, I'll just say, well, I was giving you a devotional. That's what you asked for. But they're given a devotional, and they're in there for an hour and a half, and what it turned into was they started talking about some of the sins they're struggling with. And all of them start talking about one in particular, where it came down to most of the guys saying, I've seen it, or I struggle with it, or it's a difficulty. And I was able to talk to a few of those guys after the fact. I had never seen that. And I've been a part of this camp for 11 or 12 years. Never seen anything like that before. The honesty from those young men that they chose to do that on their own, to talk to each other and help each other through those things. And at the end of the week, all of them said that this camp was something that had greatly changed them for the future. Not just because of their newfound honesty about these things they're struggling with, but because they know that they're there for each other and that they can be forgiven of those things. And in talking to them about this issue, they reminded each other that God sees them as they struggle with this. That He's not distant from them while they're trying to do the right thing. That He doesn't turn His back when they get it wrong and they make mistakes, but that He's watching them. And He's watching them fall when they do the wrong thing, cheering them on to do the right thing, and with them, providing them what they need so that they can do the right thing. And so to the Christians here, following their example, seeing what we see with Zacchaeus, you might be in a spot where you are stuck, where you feel stuck. And maybe it's because of a sin, maybe it's because things with Christ have become routine. This is what we do. Jesus sees you. And when we say he came to seek and save the lost, we're still talking about us. Just because we're Christians now doesn't mean Jesus has stopped coming after us, that he's stopped seeing us, that he's stopped wanting us just as bad as he did before. And just like we said to the non-Christian a moment ago, there's nothing too bad that you've done that Jesus can't fix. You are not too far away from him that you can't come back. And like Zacchaeus say, if I've defrauded, I'll give it back fourfold. God, I'm coming back to you. I don't know where you are. I do know that wherever it is, Jesus still sees you, and he still wants you back. If we can pray with you this morning about either of those things, to help you encounter God for the first time or help you get back to him as a family here, we want to do that for you.